Hello, welcome to Gardener's World. Last week I was sweeping up the leaves off the lawn and they've fallen like mad since then. And if they fall in the border, they tend to lie on top of the plants, particularly as they die back, and they can then harbour every single bacteria and fungus and slugs and snails that are in the border. So either way, best just to rummage through with your fingers, like scrabbling through hair, take the leaves out, and the best place for the leaves is to take and store them as leaf mould. Today is the last of our regular visits to berry fields this year, and we shall be using the programme to look back over the highlights of the series. And it's easy to forget just how much these borders have changed since the beginning of the year. Back in the middle of February, the borders showed some promise of the fantastic display ahead. We'd carefully protected our bananas over the winter, but wouldn't know if they'd survived until the spring. Well, our bananas didn't just make it through to spring, they've made it through almost till winter. Here we are in November, they're still growing strongly, still giving us a huge amount of pleasure here in the long borders. We've got all our fleece to hand, but until the point when they're necessary, just enjoy them. In today's programme, we'll be doing our final preparation for the Tulip Watch trial as I show you how to plant the tulips. And everybody is here at Berryfields today. We've got Carol in the alpine garden, Joe in the courtyard, and Sarah sorting out the dahlias. And also, get yourself a pencil and paper, because I'll be giving you details later in the show of a brand new trial that will be starting today, and this time it's edible. Now, over the last few years, there has been a huge increase of interest in growing and eating your own veg. And it does look as though the sales of vegetable seeds are set to overtake those of flower seeds for the first time since the Second World War. But we have received a lot of letters and emails from you saying you would love to grow vegetables if you had space. And that's the reason that we started the container vegetable garden. We started with a small paved area in the corner of the veg garden and then got planting into a wide range of containers from the wacky to the traditional. We were so pleased with the results that in June we took the whole lot along to Gardener's World Live. I do know that quite a few of you who saw this garden at Gardener's World Live commented that it was much smaller than you thought it was. Well, that of course was the point of the exercise, to show that you can have lots of interesting vegetables in a small space if you grow them in containers. And you can keep those vegetables going right across the year. And I'm planting out some Japanese onion sets. This is a variety called Radar. And you put them in just like normal onion sets. I've made a very gritty mix, half our own compost and half horticultural grit, so they don't sit in the wet over winter. And they will give us a harvest towards the end of next spring. But throughout the summer we did have some fabulous crops, particularly the Mitsuna and the lettuces went really well. We had good potatoes, and above all, the carrots were a success. I tell you what, this is a fabulous crop. I don't think I've ever seen better. And all from a little tin, perhaps 10 inches by 9. You can't sow carrots now, but there are other vegetables to keep your containers going through the winter. If you don't have any seeds that are ready to plant out, you can go to a garden centre tomorrow and you should be able to get some spring greens or some Japanese onions, plant them up, and you're away. You've joined that marvellous cycle of growing your own fresh, delicious vegetables, even if it's in a window box.
Another new project we started early this year was to build this alpine garden. There weren't very many alpines at Berryfields, and yet they're a fascinating group of plants, and we know lots of you love growing them. I love them too. But we decided to do things properly, and the first thing we needed was an alpine house. We had an old propagation house which was ripe for conversion. All we had to do was move it, give it a lick of paint, and add plenty of extra ventilation. As far as the plants are concerned, living in an alpine house is just like living outside. It's just as cold in here, and there's masses of ventilation, so there's constant fresh air. But there's one major difference, and that is, in here there's a roof. A lot of them are rosette plants. If they were growing outside in ordinary conditions, all that winter rain and those soggy conditions would just make them rot. So the roof's here to protect them. But if you haven't got room for an alpine house, you can grow exactly the same sort of plants in a cold frame. but we also wanted to grow alpines outside. So earlier this year, Joe and I constructed this raised bed.
That's coming on, Carol, looking great.
Yeah, we made a real start, haven't we?
Right, what about some soil then?
Yeah, could do with that lot right at the back here.
And this soil that we're using is ready mixed. I mixed it up before. It's 3 parts soil, 2 parts compost, and 1 to 2 parts grit or sharp sand. But don't get too hung up on the exact measurements. It's all about drainage, really.
I think we got the mix a bit rich. And if you look at a plant like this erodium, there's its root right back in there, but it's spread into this massive carpet, and they all have actually. So I'm going to impoverish the soil, and I'm just going to take masses of this soil in between out and replace it with grit. Once we got the raised bed and the alpine house up and running, we wanted to extend the area. First, Monty laid a path for the alpine house, gave the whole area a good digging over and added plenty of grit for good sharp drainage. Then he covered the whole area with gravel over a weed suppressing membrane. The finishing touch was this beautiful stone trough. It really is lovely, and we planted it up with alpine phlox and auriculas. As you can see, these phlox have really done a bit too well, so I'm going to lift one of them up because I think 2 is all we need, and that'll make a lot of fine plants for our new garden. And in their place I'm going to add some iris reticulata. It's called reticulate because it's got these netted bulbs. In February and March it absolutely brightens the whole garden up with these jewel-like colours, blues and purples. But in subsequent years it very often fails to flower, and people get really fed up and worried about it. But the trick is to plant them with at least 4 inches of soil over the top of the bulbs, and with a bit of luck they won't break up into lots and lots of bulbils and make all this grassy foliage. You'll just get loads of flowers year after year.
I've been developing this courtyard garden over the last year. Now, when I first came to Berryfields at the beginning of the year, this space had a bit of an identity crisis. It had been through 3 different guises at least, so I saw it as an opportunity to stamp my mark here. And the first thing I did was clear out all the pots from last Christmas and start with a blank canvas. And because it's all paved, we can't plant into the ground. So I built these chunky oak railway sleeper beds here and planted into them, and also incorporated a couple of benches. There's an L-shaped bench in this corner, which is a very sociable space to sit. And over the year, I've been replenishing these zinc pots in this corner, and we've got different colours into it, and I've gone for more of a textural contrast now that I planted up last week, and that's working well into this corner. Over here I wanted a ceiling to the garden and also an entrance, somewhere you walk through. So I put in this pergola, this wire pergola that spans the whole garden. It's not too mean, it's nice and generous, but it's still light and airy, and I wanted something special to grow up it. So I chose a wisteria. Key is to buy one that's already in flower. If you grow one from seed, you might be waiting 20 years for it to flower. Whereas the ones that you buy from the garden centre these days in flower are grafted onto a more mature rootstock. And that's going to encourage it to grow more vigorously and flower quicker. And the wisteria has done really well. I will put money on that flowering again next spring. This raised bed has been really lovely all summer, but the Niphophyias that I put in got a bit congested, and I had to take the canna lilies out anyway and overwinter them in the greenhouse. So I put in some Festuca glauca, which is a good evergreen grass. For a shot of colour, I've planted some Schizostylus cochineal major, and it's a really good red. And I've drifted them through this bed here. And then to finish it off, I'm putting in another grass, Uncinia egmontiana. It's evergreen, so it'll be here all winter. And then I'll probably leave that into next year too. But I also wanted to get, some sound into the garden and some movement into the garden too. So I built a water feature. The idea was to create a homemade water feature from the oak sleepers and natural slates that would blend in with the planters and the rest of the courtyard. Now we're going into the colder weather, it's a good idea to put your water feature to bed for the winter. Siphon off the water, remove the pump and clean the filter. But for next year, I've already got some ideas. I want to put some interesting hanging baskets up here, something quite contemporary, maybe reinvent the hanging baskets. And I also want to change the colour of the walls. That white worries me a little bit. I want to warm them up a bit. And I also want to give this entrance here a wow factor.
I really like the changes that Joe has made to the courtyard, and I'm looking forward to seeing what he does next year. Now, talking about changes, this time last year, we asked you to let us know what you would like us to do with this area, which we call the Viewer's Garden. You wanted us to make a jungle garden, so that's what we set out to do. However, it did not have an auspicious start.
Really? To dig holes in this mud and plant it up with the bamboos would not be a good idea. I don't think it would be very good for the bamboos. It certainly wouldn't be good for me. And we've got time. We don't have to hurry about this. We've got all summer long to transform this into a really spectacular jungle.
And we didn't start planting properly until June. However, the first thing we got in were the bamboos, and come and have a look, because they've done well. This is the black bamboo, the Philostachys nigra, which is looking slightly threadbare, but then black bamboos can resent being moved, and also they don't like wind, so we just need to keep an eye on that, but I'm sure it'll be fine. But if you want a plant that's going to make your garden feel instantly exotic and jungle-like, well then you must have a tree fern. In fact, the biggest problem that Joe and I had was whether we have one or two.
I've actually made a decision which we're going to have. Both. You've completely persuaded me. I'll dig a hole.
There are three things to bear in mind when planting a Dicksonia. The first is it doesn't need a hole any bigger than the pot that it's in. Put a little bit of leaf mould in to help drainage. And finally, firm it in really, really well, because it's top heavy, and this is the only way of ensuring that it doesn't blow over.
Do you know that's the most exciting plant I've ever put in?
It did actually get quite badly frosted in May, but it recovered well and has kept growing. But to protect it from frost, and the other one later this year, we're going to do a little trial. A few weeks ago, I put this fleece sleeve over this tree fern, the idea being that if you do that while it's green and leave it on all winter, you can then remove it after the last frost and you start the spring with nice green fronds. This one we're going to leave, just pack some straw in the crown so that no ice forms. These will die back, but the whole thing should grow back healthily, and we'll monitor it and see which one looks best next spring.
After the ferns were in, over the summer we carried on planting with a variety of plants, including cannas, persicaria and a passion flower that will give us the feel and look of a jungle.
I think you can say that this jungle garden has been an unqualified success. Now, we're making a number of new gardens next year, and we hope that one of them, the one that we're making from seeds and cuttings, will involve as many of you as possible, because if you've got any plants that you're growing from seeds or cuttings, you can start thinking about them now and bring them along to next year's Gardeners World Live, where we will be having the plant swap, just as we have done for the last 2 years, and we can exchange our Berryfield plants for yours and then bring them back and grow them here. And in fact, one of the highlights of this year was meeting so many of you at occasions like Gardeners World Live throughout the year. As well as thousands of you visiting it, we had a royal visit from His Royal Highness Prince Charles. The roadshow this year was in Nottingham, and I know lots of you came along to the Malvern Spring Show and met us there. And many thousands of you took part in the dahlia and pumpkin trials. So we did have plenty of contact, but we can never have too much. So please do keep in touch.
I've really loved meeting everyone at the shows through the year, and I know you've really loved the dahlia trials, so I'm going to put it to bed for the winter. What you normally do is you wait until the frost blackens the leaves, but we need this area for tulip watch, and so we're going to dig up the dahlias. In the south of England, I actually leave my dahlias in the ground, and if you're lucky enough to have a really sheltered spot, you can do that if you mulch them 3 or 4 inches. I use mushroom compost over mine. But here we need the garden for the tulips, and we're going to store some and actually discard some. And that's why we've labelled them, so that we know really clearly which are the ones we love. The foliage needs to be cut down to a couple of inches from the ground, and then you just want to come quite away from the plant so you don't break or slice through any of those lovely fat sausages that are hanging below the plant, below soil level. And I can just clean most of the soil off this and then store it through the winter. An expert once told me, don't let any water near them at all. Let them dry for a couple of weeks upside down so that any moisture drains out of the hollow stems away from the tubers. And then just knock the dry soil off them. Don't wash them. I'd then advise dusting them with sulphur powder and storing them in boxes lightly covered with dry compost or sand. You must then store them in a dark and cool but frost-free place. This year, it's rumoured that we're in for a very cold winter, so you need to decide whether to take the risk and leave your dahlias in the garden or whether you're going to lift them. In most areas of the garden here at Berryfields, we're leaving them in, but the dahlia trial bed I've had to lift because we need the ground for Tulip Watch. I don't know about you, but I really love tulips, and this Easter I went to Holland to see what was happening now in the tulip industry. The history of Dutch tulips extends right back to the 1600s, when Holland lost its heart and head to them during tulipomania, when a bulb could cost as much as a house in Amsterdam. Today, if you want to see carpets of bulbs, then Keukenhof Gardens are the place to come. I can't believe I'm at Keukenhof, because it's a place I've wanted to come literally all my life, so it's very, very exciting for me. But tell me the history of the place here.
Well, the history of this place goes back to the 15th century, and this resort belongs to a countess.
Right.
And it was more or less her kitchen garden, so that's the name Keukenhof.
And here there are how many varieties?
There are about 500-600 different varieties, and every year they plant here somewhere between 7 and 8 million bulbs.
And tell me, how much of the bulb market is supplied by Holland?
About 65-70% of the world production is done in Holland, yeah. The so-called fringed tulips are getting very popular.
Those are the ones with very, very, very serrated edges.
Yes, that's true. That's true. Like you use a pair of scissors to cut them all. Yeah.
Hybridising bulbs is big business. At this tulip farm, over 400 bulbs are being trialled. So why are so many of them dead-headed?
That is for that they produce a tulip inside the ground. I can show you. These are the skins from last year. Mm-hmm. When I peel it a little bit, you can see here is the new bulb already. Yeah. And in June or July, this bulb is completely ready and it got a big size.
So what would happen if you didn't deadhead it?
When I didn't deadhead it, I won't get a big bulb like this, but I only get a small bulb like that.
Ah. How do you produce a whole new variety?
We take a small cup and a brush. Mm-hmm. And then I take from, for example, from this flower.
Yeah.
I got the pollen.
Yeah. Oh yeah, there was lots of pollen in that one.
Yes. Then I take the brush. If you open it, then I can see the stamp as much as possible. See, you can see it here.
Yeah.
And then I'm taking this away. And I just leave the stamp on like that. And then I let the stamp grow. And I pick up the stamp.
Yeah.
I dry that. Mm-hmm. And then later, a month later, I peel the stamp.
Yeah.
It is filled with a lot of seeds.
Seeds, yeah.
And I'm planting the seeds then again. And it takes over about 4 or 5 years to get one flower. So it's very, specialist work.
It's really incredibly time-consuming.
It is.
And after growing from seed, it can be another 20 years before the tulip is commercially available. I've spotted one not yet available to buy, but well worth waiting for. I came to Holland very unconvinced about fringed tulips. I just wasn't sure about them at all. But the funny thing is, they're the ones I've fallen in love with. I completely think this is spectacular, this new one that Simon has bred. And if you look at it in a combination with this orange Darwin hybrid, a widely available tulip, you can see it's a really sensational mix. Those are the two that ideally I'd love to take back to Berryfields to plant to make a wonderful flower arrangement. I really loved that black currant fringe tulip. It was just completely beautiful. So new that it doesn't even have a name yet. It won't be available in this country because it's still being bulked up and probably actually won't be available till 2007. But I love that colour combination too, the sort of blackcurrant, purple and crimson with orange. And so I'm going to do it with two readily available varieties, Queen of Nights, which I'm putting in here, and the Orange Darwin Hybrid, which will both flower at the same time.
Well, those tulips will look absolutely fantastic in spring. And I love the way that tulips bring such richness and colour, like no other plant in spring. But what I want to do now is look at one very special tulip. And it's not rich at all, but it is beautiful. And it's spring green, which we're using for our tulip watch. And tomorrow is the big day when we all plant our bulbs. But before then, I do just want to show you how we're planting them here so that we can all do it in exactly the same way. Because the experiment will only have validity if we all try and do it in the same way on the same day. Now, we gave away 15,000 of the spring green bulbs in boxes like this. Well, they went very, very quickly, but you can still buy them. If you go out tomorrow to a garden centre near you, they're for sale with various different packaging. As long as it's spring green and you get 3 bulbs and you plant it tomorrow on November the 5th, bonfire night, you can take part in Tulip Watch. And the point of the exercise is to monitor the arrival of spring in the UK. Because spring green is a mid-season tulip. It reliably flowers right in the middle of spring. So if it's in flower and looking good, you can guarantee it is spring, regardless of whether there's snow and ice or whether it's been blazing sun for weeks. That is a marker of spring. Now, one of the easiest ways to plant them is with a bulb planter. We're looking to plant these at 4 inches depth. So if you've got a bulb planter that's marked like this one is, it's so much the easier. And simply take out a core to the full depth of the bulb planter, which in this case is about 6 inches, and then put in a couple of inches of grit in the bottom of the hole. It is essential that tulips have good drainage. So unless you've got very, very sandy soil indeed, add some grit below it, and you certainly won't do any harm, and quite often you'll do a lot of good. And you simply take the bulb, pointy end up of course, pop it in the hole. And we should plant them in a row, 6 inches apart. So simply measure it like that, down it goes. That gives me the soil to put in over the other one, and straight away mark it there and repeat the exercise. A couple of inches of grit, the bulb on top of that, and then the third one goes in here, and take the soil from that, put it over the top, spread it out. Now what we really want to hear from you is when your spring green tulips are at their very best. I've got a tulip here. Now this is obviously not spring green, it's a florist tulip that's been forced. But it does give an idea of what a tulip should look like when it's at its peak. It's got a nice, upright, firm goblet that is open, you can see inside it, and none of the petals are falling loose. And when it's like that, that's when we want to hear from you. And it'll probably only last for a few days in that state. Now here at Berryfields, I would confidently expect that to be between April 20th and April 25th. But obviously in different parts of the country, it'll be different, and that's precisely why we're doing the experiment. And we'll be telling you next year how to email us, write to us, go to our website, all the addresses, and we'll be reminding you of what the flowers should look like. So tomorrow, get your bulbs, and we'll all plant them together right across the country for the beginning of this huge experiment. I can reveal that our next trial for next year will be growing chilies. Now I'm delighted about this because chilies are a favourite of mine. And the great thing about growing chilies is it doesn't matter if you're a chili head and you'll love growing and eating them, or you've never grown them before, whether you've got a vegetable garden or you've just got a windowsill, you can take part in the trial. In fact, all you need is a pot that big and you can take part in this trial. There are over 400 different types of chili that you can grow, but we've chosen 3 for our trial. Now the first is called Numax Twilight. Now this is a chili that can be grown equally well indoors as well as outside, and recent RHS trials have shown that chilies do surprisingly well when grown outside. So we'd like you to grow this both indoors on a windowsill or in a greenhouse, as well as outside in a container. And here at Berryfields, we'll be trialling it in lots of different places around the garden to see how it does.
The second one is called Fiesta. It claims to have masses of tasty, brightly coloured chilies, and we do want to see just how many chilies one can produce on a single plant, with a competition to see who can produce the most. And finally, there's Joe's Long. It produces exceptionally long, tasty red fruit. And we'll have a competition to see who can grow the longest, and I'll be showing you tips on how to produce a single extra long chilli. Now, if you like hot chilies, these are all hot, and one of the things we'll be looking at next year is how you measure the hotness of a chilli. We're giving away 1,000 free packets of each of these 3 varieties. You can get your free seeds either by going to CFAX page 621, or you can go to our website, which is bbc.co.uk/gardening. If you don't manage to get free seeds, don't worry, you can still take part in the trial because you'll be able to buy them from any garden centre. When you get your seeds, hang on to them and we'll all plant them together on our first programme back next March. But here are some jobs that you can get on with this weekend.
Any time between now and Christmas is a good time to propagate your rhubarb. Divide established crowns so that each section has a bud. Then transplant the sections into soil that's been well enriched with organic material.
It's a good time to tidy up your lilies in the garden. Cut the stems down or pull them, because otherwise the rotting stem may rot down into the bulb.
Black grass has become a very fashionable plant. If you just can't get enough of it, then why not grow some from its berries? Sow the whole berries in gritty compost, pushing them well below the surface. Cover them with grit and water well.
Bare root roses are available at garden centres. Now these are often cheaper than potted roses. Prepare a hole with plenty of organic matter, plant so the graft union is below soil level, firm in, and finally water.
Here we go. Tee it up. There you go, Joe.
Ah, lovely. Thanks, Monty. Cheers.
That's yours.
Thank you.
And the raspberry one for you.
Thank you very much.
And that's mine. Well, I tell you, I think the thing that's given me more pleasure than anything else this year have been our trials, particularly the dahlias. I've never grown them from seed before. They're fantastic. And the chili trial next year will be interesting.
I've really enjoyed putting those hot colours in the top of the long borders. I think they've worked fantastically well.
Yeah, and on the cool side, I particularly enjoyed extending the spring garden. I think it really made it into a whole different entity, and I think it's going to be really exciting in March and April when it starts to burgeon.
I've really enjoyed the lovely shrubbery, you know, planting on that scale, sculpting that viburnum-tinus, you know.
So beautifully.
Yeah, looks fantastic, but I'm interested to see how it develops. I think it's going to just take off next year.
So lots to look forward to next year. And although this is the last of our regular visits to Berryfield this year, we've got 4 more programmes of shorter versions of our 1-hour specials that we first showed in the summer. There's Gardener of the Year coming up between now and Christmas, and of course our own Gardener's World Christmas special, which will be broadcast on December the 23rd, so don't miss any of those. And join us again back here at Berryfields for the next series, which will start next March. So until then, bye-bye.
I'm afraid the prospects for gardeners this weekend look very limited, because although there'll be a bright start on Saturday with a touch of ground frost in the east, cloud and rain will quickly spread in from the west and reach most parts by the afternoon. And then on Sunday there's heavy rain everywhere, especially in the south, although there might be some brighter moments in the north.